Hello, my name is Kristen Bolden, and I'd like to welcome you to The Other Side of History. In this talk, I'd like to talk on the birth of Jesus Christ. Now, the Israelites, they had long been expecting that the promised Messiah would be born amongst them. And when the angel announced to Mary that she was to be the mother of the Redeemer, her submission to the divine will, it really is quite remarkable. Mary had to have known that conceiving a son without having known a man would bring her reproach for a lifetime, but she was willing to do whatever God wanted of her. Now, Luke chapter 1, verses 26 and 27, it says, Gabriel was sent from God unto the city of Galilee, named Nazareth, to a virgin espoused to a man whose name was Joseph, of the house of David, and the virgin's name was Mary. Now, there are some who have assumed that the ancient Hebrews, they treated their women the way that some of the modern inhabitants of the Near East do. Some claim that Mary was perhaps only 12 years old when she was betrothed to Joseph, and then Jesus was born. Now, there is no proof for such a claim. It makes much more sense to me that Mary was a grown woman, perhaps in her 20s. Now, if Mary was 20 when Jesus was conceived, she would have been about 4 years old when the work on the temple began. She would have grown up hearing stories of the gradual erection of the temple that took place throughout her childhood. She most likely would have also heard about some of the terrible things that King Herod was doing. If Mary was around 20 when Jesus was born, she would have been around 14 when the outer courts of the temple was completed and when she and her parents were able to enter them. Now, the year that we're looking at for the birth of Jesus Christ is the year 4 BC. Now, this year of 4 BC was the 23rd year of the reign of Caesar Augustus. Now, it was Caesar Augustus that called on everyone in the entire empire to go to the city of his birth and to register for tax purposes. We find this in Luke chapter 2, verse 1. And it says, And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus, that all the world should be taxed. So, who was this man, Caesar Augustus? Well, Caesar Augustus actually changed his name. He had been called Octavian, and his story is a good example why you can't take Hollywood or movies as your facts for history. There are movies that portray Cleopatra as being in such love with Antony that she committed suicide rather than to be taken by the next ruler, who was Octavian. The truth really was that Cleopatra was after anyone who was in power so that she could gain political control for herself. Now, after the death of Julius Caesar, Cleopatra threw herself at Mark Antony. Antony ended up spending so much time living with her that he let his military defenses become weak, which led to his downfall. Then, when Antony's forces they were annihilated, Cleopatra, she fled to Egypt and decided that she needed to rid herself of Antony and win the love of Octavian, who had become the new ruler of the Roman Empire. Now, I rather like Octavian, who, remember, later became Caesar Augustus. And this is one of the reasons why I like him. On August 1 of 30 BC, Octavian, he entered Alexandria, Egypt. But unlike his predecessors, he was always faithful to the one that was his wife. He refused to yield to the wiles of Cleopatra. The scheming and disloyal Cleopatra had sent word to Antony that she had committed suicide. Antony, he was distraught, and he had made an earlier suicide pact with her, and he tried to kill himself. But the sword that was thrust into his body had only left him with a serious wound. Learning of this, Cleopatra and her women, they actually slew this Roman leader, Mark Antony, which she had pretended, I would say, to love. Then, like I've already said, Cleopatra, she then tried to win the affections of Octavian, who was too noble and he was too wise to stoop to the wiles of Cleopatra. Now, when Cleopatra saw that she had no hope in winning the affections of Octavian, and that he was not a man to be manipulated by her, she held an asp to her breast and committed suicide. So now that's a little bit of a detour, but when I think of Caesar Augustus, I think of his loyalty to his wife and his focus on being a ruler of Rome rather than being manipulated by someone like Cleopatra, who had gained the reputation of being the whore queen. It was about every 10 to 14 years that the rulers of Rome checked on how many people were in the empire. Not only the Roman citizens, but also those that were living in Spain, Gaul, Egypt, Syria, and Palestine. Now, from the Roman historical records, we know that this was done until the year 175 AD. Now, this decree from Caesar Augustus, that all the world should be taxed, it was actually an order for the taking of a census. The tax levy on each nation was based on this census, and Rome used the income from these taxes to build great buildings and sport arenas. Now, we know that it was because of this decree that both Mary, who was now heavy with child, and Joseph, they journeyed south to Bethlehem for the enrollment. I'm sure that we all know the story very well, how there was no room there at the inn and how they had to stay in a shelter for animals. Now, sometimes people built their homes into a cliff with a cave that was underneath the home. The animals, they had shelter and there in that cave below, but also the heat from the animals, it would rise and it would keep the people that were up above warm. So the cave below, it was level with the road, and the house above, it was reached by climbing stone steps. Within the cave, which had been cut into the soft limestone, a stone trough was also cut from the rock. Iron rings were attached to it, to which the animals, they were tied at night. Justin Martyr, the Roman Catholic saint, he wrote that Jesus was born in a cave. Although even today in Bethlehem, caves are still used to stable sheep and cattle, I am not sure that Christ was born in a cave. The cave actually has been used as icon worship in ancient mystery religions. So there is a cave of Ignatius Loyola that one can go and see. In Hinduism, there is a cave that is dedicated to their god, Shiva. And there are also 1,200 cave temples that are still in existence. Most of these actually are Buddhist. So I guess the point is that whether Christ was born in a cave or not, it is certainly not something that we are to be worshiping. This relic worship is something that came from paganism and was not what the early Christians, Christianity in its purity, ever did. Several centuries later, in 325 AD, a bishop of Jerusalem informed the emperor, who was Constantine, that in Bethlehem there was a cave, which the people of the town venerated as the birthplace of Christ. So it was the next year that a construction of a church began over the cave. And my parents, they were actually there when they did a tour there of the Holy Lands. The church that has been built and rebuilt over this site is called the Church of the Nativity. And there is a cave that is beneath the church building that is called the Grotto of the Nativity. And they claim that on the walls of this cave there's these white things that they say are it's the milk of the Virgin Mary. So to me, all of this really is nothing but icon worship. Now, another structure that was also used for the animals was a walled enclosure that was open to the sky. But there were covered wooden stalls that were built against the enclosing walls where the cattle could be sheltered. A structure like this could also have been the place where Jesus was born. Now, if you have your Bible, turn with me to Micah. And this is chapter 5, verse 2. It says, "But thou, Bethlehem Ephratah, though thou be little amongst the thousands of Judah, yet out of thee shall he come forth unto me, that is to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth have been from old, from everlasting." So during this time, there were actually two Jewish Bethlehems that were in existence. Jesus Christ, the promised Messiah, he was born in Bethlehem Ephratah, which was the Bethlehem in Judea, only 5 miles from Jerusalem. And this was actually also where King David had been born. The other Bethlehem, it was located in Palestine and was Bethlehem of Zebulun. So God, he was very precise in his prophecy. He made sure that we knew which Bethlehem his son would be born. We are told that the night of Christ's birth, the shepherds, they were out in the fields at night with their flocks, after the rainfall of spring and before the rains of November begin. All of the shepherds, they were out in their fields with their flocks, both day and night. Now, the month of December, it does not fit with the birth of Jesus Christ. For one, this was not the time when all of the shepherds were out in the fields with their flocks by night. The author of the reference book that I am using for this series, which is called The Fabulous First Centuries of Christianity, the author, he says that it was most likely the month of September, maybe even October, when Jesus was born. The details that we do know about Jesus, they point to him being born in 4 BC. If Jesus was not born in 4 BC, he would have had to have been born 10 to 14 years earlier, when there was a previous census that was done by Augustus. However, if that was so, there are certain other facts that we know about Jesus Christ that would not fit. For instance, we know that Jesus was baptized when he became 30, and then 3.5 years later, he died at the time of the spring Passover. The idea of Christ being born in December has absolutely nothing to do with the Bible and the chronology that is found in the Bible. There is no data that exists that justifies the choice of December 25 as the birthday of Jesus Christ. Now, historians also tell us that there is no historical evidence that Jesus' birthday was celebrated during the apostolic or early post-apostolic times. Samuel J. Andrews, in his book, The Life of Our Lord Upon the Earth, says, "It is now generally granted that the day of the Nativity was not observed as a feast in any part of the church, east or west, till sometime in the 4th century. If any day had been earlier fixed upon as the Lord's birthday, it was not commemorated by any religious rites, nor is it mentioned by any writers." End quote. So why today does the world believe that December 25th was the birthday of Jesus Christ? Well, December 25th was the birthday of the pagan sun god Mithra. The pagans, they had an annual festival for the sun god that fell on the 25th of December. During the winter solstice, the strength of the sun, it begins to increase. The day, in a sense, it marks the birth of a new sun. As apostasy came into the early Christianity, the early Christian church, the apostate Christians, they began to celebrate the birth of Christ on the birthday of Mithra, the sun god. Now, the fact that a large part of the Christian world identifies this date of December 25th as Jesus' birthday, and that December 25th is also the birthday of the sun god, Mithra, it is not a mere coincidence. It is also not a coincidence that a large part of the Christian world holds Sunday sacred, which is the day of the sun god Mithra. The idea that Sunday is sacred is not found in the Bible. And history also proves that Sunday sacredness did not exist amongst the early Christian church. Now, Walter Hyde, in his book, Paganism to Christianity in the Roman Empire, he says, remains of the struggle are found in two institutions adopted from its rival by Christianity in the 4th century. The two Mithric sacred days, which is December 25th, the birthday of the sun, as the birthday of Jesus, and Sunday, the venerable day of the sun, as Constantine called it in his edict of 321. End of quote. Now, 40 days after the birth of Jesus, Joseph and Mary, they made the short trip from Bethlehem to Jerusalem to present the baby Jesus, and he was registered as an Israelite there on the temple rolls. Here he was also blessed by Simeon and Anna. Now, Luke 2:29 through 32, and also verses 34 and 35 says, Lord, now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace according to thy word. For that mine eyes have seen thy salvation, which thou hast prepared before the face of all people, a light to lighten the Gentiles, and the glory of thy people Israel. And Simeon blessed them, and said unto Mary his mother, Behold, this child is set for the fall and rising again of many in Israel, and for a sign which shall be spoken against. Yea, a sword shall pierce through thine own soul also, that the thoughts of many hearts may be revealed. After Jerusalem, Joseph and Mary returned to Bethlehem, thinking that perhaps that is where that they should settle there in order to raise Jesus. Now, as a skilled carpenter, Joseph, he could most likely have found work anywhere. Now, the part of the story about the Magi is a fascinating part of the narrative. The Magi, they were wealthy men of high rank who had studied the Bible prophecies, and they knew that the coming of the Jewish Messiah was near. The star that guided them, I believe, was a cluster of shining angels. It led the travelers towards the west, and then, after leaving Jerusalem, it turned southerly towards Bethlehem. When the Magi first saw the light in the sky, within a short time they must have set out on their journey and completed it quite quickly. It was 40 days after Jesus' birth that he was presented by his parents there at the temple in Jerusalem, and then they returned to Bethlehem. Now, during this time, the Magi, they were journeying west. When the Magi arrived in Jerusalem, it would have most likely been late October or maybe even the beginning of November. Now, Matthew chapter 2, verse 11, it says, And when they were come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented unto him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. Now, after speaking with Herod, the Magi, they were led by the light to Bethlehem and to the home where Jesus was. Now, notice that the Magi did not visit Jesus when he was in the cattle shed, but later when Mary and Joseph had a house in Bethlehem. It's possible that even on the same night of the Magi's visit, that Joseph was warned in a dream to quickly flee with Mary and Jesus into Egypt. Now, in God's providence, God had it where there were these expensive gifts of the Magi that would have provided all of the funds that they would have needed for their stay there in Egypt, and then later also their return to Nazareth. Herod the Great would have waited maybe a day or two for the return of the Magi, and when they did not return, he ordered the slaying of the infants of Bethlehem. Of course, by that time, Joseph, with the mother and the child, were far away on the road to Egypt. An exile from any part of the Roman world could more easily lose himself in Egypt than anywhere else. Egypt differed from all of the other provinces of the Roman Empire because it was directly subject to the administration of the emperor. It was a source of grain, and no senator or general could even set foot in Egypt without special permission. Also, the Egyptian army there was under the command of the wealthy classes of Egypt. So God always knows what is best. And he speaks to us just like he spoke to Joseph in that night dream. Let's always be open to hearing his voice, just like Joseph was. I hope you've enjoyed this little talk. I want to thank you for listening. And if you have enjoyed this talk, just click on that like and that subscribe button. Leave your comments. You are all a blessing to me. I appreciate reading your comments, and I am so glad that I can see that you are listening to these talks. I really do appreciate it, and I'm just wishing you God's blessings for each one of you.